Well, I think all you guys knew I was building this. I thought I'd shoot a video if you're curious to see where things stand today. This is the 4x8 CNC. Obviously I had to build this table first to mount everything. That's just some 8-quarter poplar, some 4x4 posts, building a super flat, 5 by 9.5. The 5 foot wide by 9.5 is the table. And that got all leveled up and built first. And then on top of that, we built this lattice work. I've just got some scrap pieces of plywood up here right now, so my tools don't all end up in the cubby holes. But the lattice work underneath that makes up the main bed of the CNC is outfitted with all these holes so that we can put clamps in there, and they act as hold down clamps. So no matter how big the piece of work is that you're working on, up to a 4x8 sheet of plywood, you can always find a nearby hole to stick one of those post screw clamps in to hold your workpiece down. So this is super flat, built right off of the MDF top of the table itself. So that makes the bed, and then the rail system for the Y-axis is it's kind of hard to see. I'll show you the profile of it down here. It's made up of 2 angle irons. Here's one here on the bottom to hold some V-groove bearings on the bottom, and the same thing on the top, another angle iron to hold a V-groove bearing on the top on the gantry leg. And then this square tube is welded together to hold this gear rail. That's just a rack and pinion gear rail. You can see there the teeth in that. There's 6.35 teeth per inch in this particular rail. And then there's a pinion gear that is spun off of this shaft. And that pinion gear obviously fits up perfectly into the rack gear and is what drives the Y-axis and the X-axis. We're going to build the same thing up here for the X-axis, and that's going to get driven the exact same way the Y-axis is. These are just a 2-to-1 step down to give us more accuracy and more resolution on the cuts, whether lasering or routing, whatever we end up doing on the Z-axis. So that's just a 2-to-1 reduction. And then the motors are a NEMA 34, pretty high power motor. They're beefy, they're super heavy. And then we just built these little, you can see it over there, these little pivot mechanisms where that spring is providing an upward pressure to engage the pinion gear into the rail gear, and that way if it ever binds and hits something, the motor assembly itself will flex down and compress that spring a little bit more and let the gear strip out, instead of, if it does bind, breaking the motor or something if it were to get bound. So that's the mounting mechanism for the motors. And of course the gantry on the top, the X-axis isn't built yet, but that'll go this way. I have some of this slide rail over here on the floor. That slide rail will get put on the X-axis. One piece will go on top, another piece will go on the face right here, and then there'll be a carriage, an L-shaped carriage system that'll ride on that rail system. That'll become the X, and then of course the Z is another system that's built that'll hold a 3 horsepower 3-phase spindle to do all of the carving. And over here I've got the drag chain. That's just how all the wiring will eventually go into the back of this big drawer. Down here is all the electronics. This is just on a big slide out, so I can slide this whole drawer system out. And then in here is where all the power supplies and the motor drivers, some fans to keep everything cool. And then on top is a controller board, and then that's connected to the computer, which is this little thing right here, is a computer sitting in here. So all the electronics sit down in this thing, into this little drawer, and then there's a cover for the top so I can see things, it's clear, and then a front that's just a furnace filter glued onto a piece of plywood, so that will sit covering the whole electronics unit down there, so that as it sucks air through to cool everything, there's a furnace filter filtering the air that just goes in there. I don't expect a lot of dust to be created by this, because the dust collecting system, I just tapped into it and ran a 4-inch line over here. I've got some of this 4-inch hose here that will hook to that and snake its way down and just attach to a Z-axis pipe that'll take it right down to a boot that's got some bristles on it. So the cutting all happens inside a perimeter of bristles that'll have the suction applied into that boot. So that'll keep everything clean in the shop when it's doing that. So that'll show you where we're at. This is the software that runs it. I'm just using my MacBook here to remote control that computer physically down there. And so you can see I've got my Z and Y and access control here. This is where you load the G code, and then this will process running the machine. And right now what I've got set up is just the Y axis, which is your up and down arrows. I can jog it around. So if I hit the up arrow on the keyboard, you can see the gantry moving down. And I can bring it all the way to the end, of course. I'll show you what's going on down there. So I don't have any limit switches set up yet, but eventually there'll be an electronic limit switch here so that when this touches this, that is the furthest extent that it can be, extended. It'll cut probably 8.5 feet this direction. I just clamped this board on here because I'm going to make a line here and then calibrate the Y-axis so that if it moves 8 feet, I want to know that it moved, exactly 8 feet. And you calibrate it all in the software. That's something I'm working on today. And if I want to run it back to me, all I got to do is hit this down arrow. That runs the unit in the other direction and comes all the way up to here. And then we built this little temporary extension bed so that when we're working on the motors, we can actually slide the whole gantry out of the system, bring it out here to a temporary rail system where we can work to assemble the motors and everything. We've got all that done now, so I don't think I need this table anymore. I'll just probably take it off and then start working on the X-axis. But we're getting close. When we get done, my first job that I want to do, or one of the first jobs I want to do, is build some more dining room chairs. You guys might remember, Roger, I know you remember these. I saved this template from those, not the dining room chairs, rather the kitchen chairs. This is my template from the kitchen chairs. And so instead of using this template, I'm just going to transfer this into SketchUp, lay a hunk of 8-quarter oak up there, and let the CNC cut me 5 or 6 legs out, and be able to build another set of chairs without having to template route them. I'll just have the CNC do it. So, all right, well, that's where we're at. I'll post another video later as we get more of the X and the Z access done, but thought you guys might want to see where we're at so far. So there it is. See ya.